Good morning, everyone. First, I want to congratulate the launching of the AI lab at US. I'm very glad that I can be part of the launching and also be part of this symposium discussing the very pressing issue of AI education. So my research focused on basically the social impacts of information and communication technologies. I have done research out of the hub of the Civic Tech Lab since as early as 2008. So our lab, now you can access the history of it through the website. As you can see that our lab has done lots of different projects in collaboration with all kinds of researchers, including computer scientists, hard scientists, policymakers, education scholars, and cultural studies scholars. If you are interested in any of those projects, you're welcome to contact me for any potential collaboration. Well, today I want to talk about a topic that's really close to my heart and my attention these days, right? So the topic is civic AI education. Many of us are involved in AI education in different ways, right? You probably would wonder, what do you mean by civic AI education? Are you going to educate AI to be civic? Or has AI ever violated any civic values or become uncivic or uncivil in any cases? So I like to start my talk with two examples. One, AI goes uncivil. So the picture here shows you the first case. It's taken in the United Kingdom in 2021. So you see a group of students and parents are protesting on the street, and they are asking to get their grades back, right? So what happened before this protest that took place was basically the pandemic, right? The pandemic was so serious, life-threatening that taking exams physically, sitting in large exam halls becomes something impossible. So the UK government was not able to hold the regular university entry exams. So what they had to do was basically to come up with an alternative solution to figure out grades for the students. They decided to use an AI technology. Well, the AI itself is actually quite a complex tool, right? So it considers multiple factors such as teachers' rankings of the students, where the students are from, the students' past academic records in the school, right? So they have chosen to use an AI rather than simply just rely on teachers' prediction, because we know that human beings tend to be not that precise, right, when it comes to the prediction. In the situation of education, grade inflation has been a problem for quite a while. And on top of that, different teachers from different schools may also have variances in the precision of their predictions. So there's a reason behind why the UK government decides to use AI to predict the grades. However, 2 days after the announcement of the AI predicted grades, parents and children were enraged by these results and accused the AI for being not fair, for being unfair. They took to the streets to protest against these AI predicted grades, and a few days later, the UK government had to take back these grades. So what is really uncivil here might not be that obvious, but if you look closer, the AI that has been used in the prediction, they tend to predict their grades based on where the students are from, right? So even if you are a very good student, but if you come from a very so-called social or ordinary school in long history, then your grades are not likely to be predicted to be high. So this poses serious fairness issues to the parents and the students. Well, if grades only affect students, the second example I show here affects all of us who are also working adults. So this is basically a case that comes from as early as 2015, when Amazon tried to experiment with a hiring tool that can basically use AI to predict which candidates should be hired and which candidates should not be hired. So the AI will eventually give the job candidates a score, right, ranging from 0 to 5-star. If you have used Amazon to buy products before, it's similar to how users rate the products, right, from 0, 1 to 5-star. So the hiring AI was in operation for a while, but before long, almost like a year later, in 2015, Amazon realized that the AI was not treating their candidates in a gender-neutral way. In other words, when it comes to jobs such as a software engineer and other technical posts, the AI tended to rate the male applicants higher than the female applicants. So what has made AI in this case violates a civil value, that's basically diversity, right? Was basically the data that has been fed into AI to do the machine training. The data came from Amazon's decades-long hiring process. So all the CVs and job performances that have been sent to Amazon was fed into these machine training algorithm. You can imagine most of these candidates and CVs come from male applicants, right? It's a common thing, not just in Amazon, but across the entire tech history. So that data, which has already been biased towards males, lead to this lack of diversity in AI recommendations when it comes to hiring decisions. So in both cases, we can see that although it seems that the AI causes a problem, an uncivil problem, but when we look further, we know that the problem is still with us, with human, right? So this makes us think, how can we educate humans to be civic? Well, we in the field of education, we actually do have a specific field called civic education that's precisely for the purpose of educating people, human, to be civic. So can we rely on civic education to solve these uncivil problems we see in AI? Well, the answer is it's not that easy, right? Civic education itself has been facing all kinds of challenges as well. So let me first give you some idea about how civic education has been conducted in history. So the traditional conception of civic education often focus on the confine of one certain nation state. Then civic education will emphasize teaching the country's political, legal, and ecosystems. Citizens are educated about their rights and responsibilities and how the government works in that particular country. While in the context of Singapore, civic education takes the name of social studies. However, civic education has been challenged by a set of global trends. One of them is basically globalization. Globalization has made such kind of value education or citizen education quite challenging when the people who live in a nation, right, are not necessarily born in the nation or not necessarily the citizens of the nation. In some countries like Singapore, immigrants actually take a large proportion of the local population. In other countries, there are refugees, many of refugees coming into the country. So how do we treat these people who are non-citizens, but still have significant impact on the society they are residing in? So this is only one manifestation of the global trend called globalization. Well, another trend that might be, serving the foundation as globalization refers to technological advancements. including information and communication technologies. In the past decade, we have seen lots of problems posed by information and communication technologies, fake news, online hatred, cyberbullying. All these emerging challenges were not really covered in the traditional curriculum of civic education. So civic education, in a way, is in trouble itself. They also need to figure out a good way, effective way to address these challenges. So to be short, civic values or civic principles sometimes are easy to say. It's easy to just list down 10, 20 values or terms to illustrate these abstract principles. But these values are very hard to practice, especially when the situations and challenges are brand new. Civic values are probably easy to teach if you teach it by just telling the students what the terms sound like. But these values are also very hard to learn by heart. Because of that, so I turned to AI education itself to look for potential answers to address similar challenges, right? So under AI education, there is a certain subfield called AI ethics, right? Or AI ethics education that is actually quite similar or quite close to civic education in general. So what has AI ethics education have done? I did a quick review of all these relevant research, and I found 3 different kinds of approaches to educating AI ethics. The first one is called guidelines. So basically, those civic values, the abstract philosophies, terms, and guidelines will be written into a format of maybe a checkbox list. So the designers, when they read through these guidelines, they can just check off all the boxes to make sure that their design conforms to these abstract values. But as you can imagine, right, these are just very abstract terms. So it becomes actually very hard for the designers to really digest these values. Well, there are research indicating that actually there's very little influence on the designers when they read these guidelines. When they make design decisions, they still have to grapple with their own individual disposition, the priority of the organization they're working for, as well as many other operational constraints. So reading guidelines, checking all the boxes doesn't really help to the designers to deal with the highly diverse and different individual situations. Well, in order to build a tangible bridge between these abstract values and the actual actions, right? So I see a second approach of AI ethics education that relies on sets of toolkits. So if you go to search for these, you can find many such open software, open source AI toolkits. So these toolkits are supposed to help the designers to actually have hands-on tasks to go through the venues. However, the toolkits have been found to, again, pose a steep learning curve, even to the designers themselves, right? And these toolkits sometimes also lack recommendations, strategic recommendations. That means if a designer finds a potential violation of ethics, the toolkits don't have very good suggestions on how to fix the problem, right? And lastly, again, toolkits still are rather standardized procedure and don't really have the capacity to accommodate all kinds of individual situations. Because of that, we see a third approach of AI ethics education emerging. So that's basically activities, right? So this approach emphasizes all kinds of activities, taking advantage of maybe a simulation game, a workbook, or other speculative design activities for the designers, basically to be educated about ethics, also to imagine all kinds of ethical considerations from different players, right? Stakeholders. So among these activities, you also see traditional or familiar design activities such as code design activities and participatory design activities, right? So all these three approaches, I think, have been quite helpful. It's definitely better than nothing. However, as you can notice, all three activities share two limitations. First, these three approaches are often limited to educating the designers, right? So as we know, AI ethic problems or uncivic AI can happen at in every stage of the life cycle of an AI technology. For instance, AI design, but also AI usage, AI repurposing, AI monitoring, so on and so forth. So the focus on designers only is rather limited. Well, the second limitation you can see here is with the major actors who are participating in these three different approaches are still designers or technologists themselves. As we know that we have lots of different actors who are involved in AI. We need to expand the scope of so-called civic actors who should be included in these processes, right? So AI ethics education, at least for now, seems to be limited at least to particular points. So I was wondering, well, whether we can somehow take the advantage of all these AI ethics education approaches, which are very practical and hands-on, with the rather philosophical and abstract, value-driven civic education programs. So myself has been a deliberation scholar. In other words, online deliberation scholars who like to combine political philosophies and technological solutions together. So I'm wondering whether we could use the deliberative citizenship as a philosophical foundation on which we can develop our AI ethics education or civic AI education. Well, deliberative citizenship, if you compare it to other notions of citizenship, is often considered as a maximal conception of citizenship because it requires the citizens to be very active in the participation. So these participations have to be both informed by good materials and reciprocal among different social actors. Well, the individuals, citizens need to have the right knowledge, skills, and dispositions, right? But that's not enough. More importantly, all these individual citizens have to have the institutional support to make the so-called reciprocal participants among social actors possible. Well, there's a fundamental commitment to two things, a balanced consideration of two things. First is, of course, the person's own welfare in the situation, but more importantly, the person has to consider the value or the benefit of the whole community, how there can be a balance between both sides. So when it comes to the actual running of a deliberative framework of civic AI education, I'll just give you a quick review about what has been typically done in other online deliberation or deliberation practices, regardless whether the focus is on AI education or not. So intrapersonal deliberation is the first step. So people will have to basically deliberate within one's own mind, right? In this safe stage, basically individuals will be given all kinds of materials, right? In this case, I imagine all the AI ethics toolkits, guidelines can be useful here, right? So these materials are given to the individuals in order to elicit reflection on their own point of view, right? Also, after reflecting on their own views, the individuals are encouraged to take other people's perspectives, to imagine what other opinions might be and what the reasons behind these alternative opinions, right? After interpersonal deliberation, there is always another stage of deliberation that happens among people, among individuals. We call that interpersonal deliberation, right? So interpersonal deliberation will put people into one discussion forum and make them talk to each other. So in this stage, what will be built is reciprocity, right? Give and take of reasons, give and take of empathy and tolerance, as well as changing one's own position, if indeed you can emphasize or you can agree with the other party's agreements. One of the very important things built through interpersonal deliberation is mutual respect, right? Even we can disagree, but we have to respect each other's opinions and where we are from. Well, ideally, after this interpersonal deliberation, there should be some kind of a consensus emerging from the individuals, right? However, even if there is not 100% perfect consensus, there should be some kind of decisions to be made. The individuals will often vote on options of solutions that come from their discussions and make a decision regarding the particular challenge. All right, so I'm going to stop there, and I hope what I've shared about the deliberative framework of civic AI education catches some of your interest. And if you are keen to explore how we actually can turn these ideas into practices, I open my welcome to all of you. I'd love to work with you and to push this initiative forward. Thank you.